The blood on Catherine Zimmerman's hands would not wash away, no matter how hard she scrubbed at the basin in her tiny bedroom. It wasn't real blood, at least not physically, but the stain of guilt that clung to her after burying Walter, her husband of just 2 years, on the unforgiving Montana prairie. As the first light of dawn crept through the window of her modest cabin outside Miles City in the spring of 1883, Catherine pressed a hand to her swollen belly, feeling the flutter of the child who would never know its father. "What am I going to do with you?" she whispered to her unborn baby, tears welling in her eyes. Catherine was 22 years old, widowed, and 7 months pregnant in a territory where a woman alone was considered little more than prey. Walter had been a decent man, a clerk from Philadelphia who'd come west with dreams of establishing a mercantile business. They'd met at a church social in Omaha, where Catherine's father had temporarily relocated the family for his railroad work. Walter had courted her properly, with her parents' blessing, before proposing marriage and promising to build her a fine house in the booming Montana territory. The small cabin was meant to be temporary, just until his business flourished. Now it was all she had left after pneumonia had taken him just 10 days ago. A sharp knock at the door startled Catherine from her thoughts. She hastily wiped her hands on her apron, smoothed back her auburn hair, and made her way to the door. Standing on her porch was Mrs. Henrietta Fulton, the banker's wife and self-appointed moral guardian of Miles City. "Good morning, Mrs. Zimmerman," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "May I come in?" Catherine stepped aside, allowing the older woman to enter. Mrs. Fulton glanced around the sparse cabin with poorly disguised disapproval before settling her gaze on Catherine's pregnant form. "I've come on behalf of the Ladies' Aid Society," Mrs. Fulton announced, placing her gloved hands primly in her lap. "We've been discussing your situation." Catherine felt her throat tighten. "My situation? A young widow alone with a child on the way. It's most unfortunate." Mrs. Fulton's voice dripped with practiced sympathy. "We believe we've found a solution. The Reverend and Mrs. Harding in Billings are unable to have children of their own. They would be willing to adopt your baby once it arrives." Catherine's hand instinctively moved to her stomach, a protective gesture. "Adopt my baby. It's for the best, dear. How will you provide? What will people say?" Mrs. Fulton leaned forward. "A respectable woman cannot raise a child alone in these parts. The child deserves a proper family with a father." "But I am the child's mother," Catherine protested, her voice barely above a whisper. "And because you are the mother, you must think of what's best for the child. The Hardings are good Christian people with means. Your baby would want for nothing." Mrs. Fulton stood, smoothing her skirts. "We'll give you time to consider, of course, but not too much time. These arrangements must be made before the birth." After Mrs. Fulton left, Catherine collapsed onto a chair, her body shaking with silent sobs. Give up her baby, the last living piece of Walter she had. The thought was unbearable, yet Mrs. Fulton's practical concerns echoed her own midnight fears. How would she provide? What kind of life could she offer a child? Catherine had sold most of their possessions to pay for Walter's medical care and burial. The mercantile business had been nothing more than a half-built storefront and a mountain of debt. There was barely enough money to last through the summer, let alone years of raising a child. She pushed herself up from the chair and walked outside to the small garden plot Walter had started before falling ill. The spring sun warmed her face as she knelt awkwardly beside the tender shoots of vegetables that had managed to push through the soil. She worked methodically, pulling weeds and mentally calculating how much food she might harvest. Not enough. Never enough. "Madam, you shouldn't be kneeling like that in your condition." Catherine turned to find a tall man on horseback watching her from the edge of her property. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps in his late 20s, with a sun-weathered face and kind eyes. "I'm fine, thank you," she replied, attempting to stand and finding it more difficult than she'd anticipated. The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion and crossed the distance between them. He offered his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Catherine accepted it, allowing him to help her to her feet. "Kyle Garrison," he introduced himself, tipping his hat. "I work at the Double Creek Ranch about 5 miles east." "Catherine Zimmerman," she replied, brushing dirt from her skirts. "I knew your husband a bit," Kyle said. "Sorry about his passing." "Walter seemed like a good man." Catherine nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "I was riding past and thought I'd check if you needed anything," Kyle continued, his eyes taking in the untended fence, the sagging porch, the thin wisp of smoke from her chimney. "Looks like you might use some help with a few things around here." Pride made Catherine want to refuse, but practicality won out. "I can't pay you, Mr. Garrison." "Wasn't asking for payment," he replied, "just being neighborly." There was something in his straightforward manner that Catherine found reassuring. Unlike the prying looks and whispered comments she endured in town, Kyle Garrison's gaze held only honest concern. "There's a loose board on the porch that needs fixing," she admitted finally, "and the pump handle sticks something fierce." Kyle nodded. "I can take care of those." "Got some time now, if that suits you." For the next 2 hours, Kyle worked steadily around Catherine's cabin, fixing not only the porch and the pump, but also reinforcing the chicken coop and patching a leak in the roof she hadn't even known existed. Catherine brought him water and watched as he moved with an easy confidence, his strong hands making short work of repairs that would have taken her days to figure out. "Why are you helping me?" she asked when he finally stopped to rest. Kyle wiped sweat from his brow. "Like I said, being neighborly. People in town aren't exactly lining up to be neighborly to a pregnant widow," Catherine said with a bitter edge to her voice. Kyle's expression darkened. "People talk too much and help too little." "The Ladies' Aid Society came by this morning," Catherine found herself saying, though she hadn't meant to share this with a virtual stranger. "They want me to give up my baby once it's born, to a couple in Billings." Kyle's jaw tightened. "That's mighty presumptuous of them." "They say I can't provide for a child on my own, that a baby needs a father." Catherine blinked back tears. "Maybe they're right." "Begging your pardon, Mrs. Zimmerman, but that's horse manure," Kyle said firmly. "Plenty of women raise children on their own. Not out here. Not without family or means." Kyle regarded her thoughtfully. "What do you want to do?" The directness of his question caught Catherine off guard. No one had asked what she wanted since Walter died. They had all told her what she should do, what was proper, what was practical. But no one had asked about her heart. "I want to keep my baby," she whispered, voicing the truth that burned in her chest. "I want to raise my child to watch them grow. I can't bear the thought of giving them away." Kyle nodded as if he'd expected nothing less. "Then that's what you should do." "It's not that simple." "No," he agreed. "Nothing worthwhile ever is." He hesitated, then added, "I could help if you'd allow it." Catherine stared at him. "Why would you do that?" Kyle removed his hat, revealing thick sandy hair and a face more handsome than she'd initially realized. "My mother was widowed when I was 4. We lived in Wyoming then, and folks told her the same thing, that she couldn't manage on her own, that she should send me to live with relatives back east. She refused." A smile touched his lips. "She was the stubbornest woman God ever created. Worked herself to the bone raising me, but we made it. When she passed last year, she went knowing she'd done right by me." He replaced his hat. So I've got some understanding of your situation, Mrs. Zimmerman, and I'd like to help if you'll let me. Catherine studied him, searching for any sign of deception or ulterior motive, but found only sincerity in his clear gaze. "I'll think on it," she said finally. Kyle nodded. "Fair enough." He gathered his tools. "I'll be back tomorrow to fix that fence, and Mrs. Zimmerman, keep your baby. I'll help you raise it, if that's what it takes." With that, he mounted his horse and rode away, leaving Catherine staring after him, her heart beating wildly with something that felt dangerously like hope. The next day, Catherine found herself watching the road for signs of Kyle's return. She told herself it was merely practical concern. The fence did need fixing, after all, but she couldn't deny the flutter of anticipation she felt when she finally spotted his approaching figure. Kyle arrived with a wagon loaded with lumber, tools, and what appeared to be several burlap sacks of supplies. He tipped his hat to her as he climbed down. "Brought some things you might need," he explained, reaching into the wagon bed and producing a sack of flour, another of sugar, coffee beans, and other staples. "Figured with your condition, you might not be getting to town much." Catherine felt her cheeks warm with a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment. "Mr. Garrison, I can't accept all this. It's too much." "Not charity, if that's what you're worried about," Kyle said easily. "Consider it an advance. You can pay me back by teaching me to read proper." Catherine blinked in surprise. "You can't read?" A slight flush crept up Kyle's neck. "Some, enough to get by, but not like educated folk. My mother taught me what she could, but there wasn't much time for learning between surviving. You want me to teach you to read in exchange for all this?" Catherine gestured at the supplies, knowing they were worth far more than a few reading lessons. "And for the fence work," Kyle added with a grin. "I'm getting quite a bargain, I reckon." Catherine couldn't help but smile back. There was something disarming about Kyle Garrison's honest manner that broke through the wall of grief and worry she'd built around herself. "Very well," she agreed. "But we start today, after the fence." Kyle worked tirelessly through the morning, replacing rotted fence posts and mending the gaps that had allowed predators to threaten Catherine's few chickens. She brought him water and watched as the fence took shape under his skilled hands. By midday, sweat soaked his shirt, and Catherine insisted he take a break. They sat in the shade of the cabin's small porch, sharing a simple meal of cornbread and dried apple slices. Catherine found herself telling Kyle about her life before Montana, about growing up in Pennsylvania, her father's work with the railroad that had brought them west, meeting Walter at that church social in Omaha. "He was so certain about everything," she said softly. "About his business plans, about moving to Montana, about our future. I believed him because he believed so completely." "Sounds like he had big dreams," Kyle commented. Catherine nodded. "Too big, perhaps. The Mercantile was going to be the finest store in Miles City. He bought inventory before the building was even finished, borrowed money against future profits." She sighed. "When he got sick, everything fell apart so quickly. The creditors took most of what we had after he died." "That's a heavy burden to carry," Kyle said quietly. "The heaviest part is knowing our child will never know him," Catherine admitted, her hand moving to her belly. "Never hear his laugh or see the way his eyes lit up when he talked about the future." Kyle was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "My father died in a mining accident," he said finally. "I don't remember much about him, just fragments, the smell of his pipe tobacco, the way he'd toss me in the air and catch me. But my mother made sure I knew him through her stories. Every night she'd tell me something about him, some small detail or memory, until he became real to me even though he was gone." "That's what I want for my baby," Catherine whispered. "To know where they came from, who their father was." Then that's what you'll give them, Kyle said with certainty. And that's something no family in Billings could provide, no matter how much money or standing they have. After their meal, Kyle returned to the fence, and Catherine retreated inside to prepare for their first reading lesson. She found an old primer Walter had ordered for the store and set it on the small table in the main room. When Kyle finished his work and came inside, his face and hands freshly washed, she gestured for him to sit. "I should warn you," he said with a self-deprecating smile, "I'm likely to be a slow student." "And I've never taught anyone before," Catherine countered. "So we'll learn together." To her surprise, Kyle wasn't nearly as illiterate as he'd implied. He could read simple words and sentences, though his pronunciation sometimes stumbled on longer words. What he lacked was confidence and practice. Catherine guided him patiently, and by the end of an hour, he was reading a simple story with growing fluency. "You're a natural teacher, Mrs. Zimmerman," he said when they finished. "Catherine," she corrected him impulsively. "If you're going to help me keep my baby, I think you should call me Catherine." Kyle's smile warmed his entire face. "Catherine, then, and I meant what I said yesterday. I'll help you however I can." "Why?" she asked, the question that had been burning in her mind since his offer. "You hardly know me." Kyle considered her question thoughtfully before answering. "My mother used to say that we're put on this earth to look out for one another. That kindness isn't something extra we do when it's convenient, it's the whole point of living." He shrugged. "Besides, I know what it's like to be judged before you've had a chance to prove yourself. Seems to me you deserve that chance." As Kyle prepared to leave that evening, he promised to return in 2 days with more supplies and to help with the garden. Catherine watched him ride away, a strange mixture of emotions swirling within her. There was gratitude, certainly, but also a flicker of something else, a warmth she hadn't felt since Walter's death, a lightness in her chest that felt dangerously like happiness. That night, for the first time in weeks, Catherine slept without nightmares. True to his word, Kyle returned 2 days later, and then again 2 days after that. Each visit brought practical help, repairs to the cabin, work in the garden, chopping firewood for the coming winter, but also something less tangible. Companionship, laughter, conversation that stretched beyond mere pleasantries into genuine connection. Their reading lessons continued, with Kyle making rapid progress under Catherine's patient guidance. He brought her books from the small collection at the bunkhouse, mostly dime novels and a few dog-eared classics left behind by previous ranch hands. In exchange, she shared Walter's small library of poetry and literature, discovering in Kyle an appreciative audience for Whitman and Dickinson. "I never understood poetry before," Kyle admitted one evening as they sat on the porch, the setting sun painting the prairie in gold and crimson. "Always seemed like fancy words saying nothing, but the way you read it makes it different somehow." "Poetry is like music without the instruments," Catherine explained. "It's about rhythm and feeling as much as meaning." Kyle nodded thoughtfully. "I like that. Makes me think of my mother singing while she worked. The words weren't as important as the feeling behind them." As June bloomed across the prairie, bringing wildflowers and longer days, Catherine found herself counting the hours between Kyle's visits. She told herself it was merely practical. A pregnant woman alone needed help. After all, but in the quiet moments before sleep claimed her, she admitted the truth. Kyle Garrison had become more than a helper. He had become her friend, perhaps her only true friend in Miles City. The Ladies' Aid Society had not forgotten her, however. Mrs. Fulton returned in the 3rd week of June, her expression souring when she spotted the improvements to Catherine's property. "I see you've had some assistance," she remarked, her eyes narrowing as she surveyed the new fence and the thriving garden. One of the ranch hands, I'm told. Mr. Garrison has been kind enough to help with some repairs, Catherine replied neutrally. Mrs. Fulton's lips thinned. A young widow should be cautious about the company she keeps, Mrs. Zimmerman. People talk. People always do, Catherine said, a new steel in her voice that seemed to surprise both women. Would you care for some tea, Mrs. Fulton? Inside the cabin, Mrs. Fulton wasted no time in returning to her mission. The Hardings are quite eager to welcome your child into their home, she said, stirring sugar into her tea. They've already prepared a nursery. Reverend Harding has connections to a fine school in Denver where the child could be educated properly. That's very kind of them, Catherine said carefully, but I've decided to keep my baby. Mrs. Fulton's spoon clattered against her cup. Mrs. Zimmerman, I don't think you understand the difficulties. I understand perfectly, Catherine interrupted gently. I know it won't be easy. But this child is mine and Walter's, and I intend to raise him or her myself. And how do you propose to support this child? Your husband left you with nothing but debts. I'll manage, Catherine said with more confidence than she felt. I can take in sewing, perhaps teach reading and writing to children too far from town for regular schooling. Mrs. Fulton set down her cup with a disapproving frown. And this sudden confidence wouldn't have anything to do with that cowboy who's been calling here regularly, would it? Really, Mrs. Zimmerman, your husband barely cold in his grave and already you're entertaining another man. Catherine felt heat rise to her cheeks. Mr. Garrison has been a kind neighbor, nothing more, and I would appreciate it if you would not imply otherwise. Kind neighbors don't visit almost daily, Mrs. Fulton sniffed. Mark my words, Catherine, no good will come of this association. A man doesn't help a woman in your condition without expecting something in return. I think you should leave now, Catherine said quietly, rising from her chair with as much dignity as her 8th month of pregnancy would allow. After Mrs. Fulton's departure, Catherine paced the small cabin, her thoughts in turmoil. Had she been naive? Was Kyle's kindness motivated by something other than genuine goodwill? The thought made her stomach clench with anxiety. When Kyle arrived the following day, Catherine greeted him with reserved politeness that he immediately noticed. "Something wrong?" he asked as they walked toward the garden. Catherine hesitated, then decided directness was best. "Mrs. Fulton visited yesterday. She suggested that your intentions in helping me might not be entirely honorable." Kyle stopped walking, his expression darkening. "Did she now?" "People are talking," Catherine continued, unable to meet his eyes. "About you visiting here so often. About a widow entertaining a man alone. Are you worried about what people think or about my intentions?" Kyle asked quietly. Catherine finally looked up at him. "I'd like to believe I know you well enough to trust your intentions. But we've only known each other a few weeks, and She trailed off, unsure how to express her confusion. Kyle removed his hat, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "Catherine, I swear to you, I never meant to cause you any trouble or harm your reputation. If my presence here is making things difficult for you, I'll stop coming." "No," the word burst from her with surprising force. "No, that's not what I want." "What do you want, then?" Kyle asked, his gaze steady on hers. "I want—" Catherine faltered, then found her courage. "I want to understand why you're doing all this. The truth, Kyle." Kyle was silent for a long moment, his eyes searching hers. Then he sighed. "The truth is, I knew your husband better than I let on. Walter and I played cards a few times at the cattleman's saloon. He talked about you constantly, how beautiful you were, how kind, how excited he was about the baby coming." Kyle's expression softened with memory. "Last time I saw him, he was worried. The business wasn't going well, and he was afraid he couldn't provide for you and the baby. He made me promise that if anything happened to him, I'd check on you. make sure you were all right. Catherine felt tears well in her eyes. You never told me. I didn't want you to think I was only helping because of a promise, Kyle admitted. And then, once I got to know you, it wasn't about that promise anymore. It was about you, your strength, your kindness, the way you face each day with courage despite everything. He took a deep breath. The truth is, I care about you, Catherine. More than I should, perhaps, but I swear I've never expected anything in return for my help. Catherine's heart raced at his words. Kyle, you don't need to say anything, he interrupted gently. I know you're still grieving Walter, and the last thing you need is another complication in your life. If you want me to keep my distance, I will. Catherine reached out, tentatively placing her hand on his arm. What I want is for you to keep your promise to me this time. To help me keep my baby, to be the friend I've come to depend on. She met his gaze steadily. And I don't care what Mrs. Fulton or anyone else in town thinks about it. Kyle's smile returned slowly. Then that's what I'll do. As Catherine's time grew nearer, Kyle's visits took on a new urgency. He stocked her woodpile high, repaired every loose board and leaky spot in the cabin, and arranged with the ranch foreman for time off when the baby came. He also brought an unexpected visitor, Mrs. Alina Morales, the wife of one of the Double Creek Ranch's vaqueros and an experienced midwife. She delivered half the babies at the ranch, Kyle explained as he introduced the kind-faced Mexican woman. I thought you might want someone experienced nearby when your time comes. Alina spoke limited English but communicated easily with Catherine through gestures, and the few Spanish words Catherine had learned from a book. She examined Catherine with gentle efficiency and indicated through pantomime that the baby was positioned correctly and seemed healthy. My bueno, she declared with a smile, patting Catherine's belly. Soon, very soon. Before leaving, Alina pressed a small carved wooden figure into Catherine's hand, a Madonna and Child, delicately crafted and polished smooth with handling. Para suerte, she explained. For luck. Catherine was deeply touched by the gesture and by Kyle's thoughtfulness in bringing the midwife. As July's heat settled over the prairie, Catherine felt a strange sense of readiness. The cabin was prepared, her meager supplies organized, and most importantly, she no longer faced the future alone. The baby decided to arrive on one of the hottest days of summer. Catherine woke before dawn to a sharp pain that stole her breath away. By the time the sun had fully risen, the pains were coming regularly enough that she knew this was no false alarm. She was grateful that Kyle had insisted on bringing her water the night before, filling every available container so she wouldn't have to pump during labor. Catherine had just resigned herself to facing childbirth alone when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Kyle appeared at her door moments later, his expression a mixture of concern and determination. Alina sent me, he explained, removing his hat. Said she had a feeling today might be the day. She's right behind me with her supplies. Relief flooded through Catherine, followed immediately by another contraction that made her grip the back of a chair and gasp. What can I do? Kyle asked, hovering uncertainly. Just stay, Catherine managed through clenched teeth. Until Alina arrives. Kyle remained by her side, supporting her through contractions, until Alina appeared with her basket of herbs and clean cloths. The midwife took charge immediately, directing Kyle to heat water and then, with gentle firmness, shooing him outside. Men wait, she said decisively. Women work. The labor progressed steadily through the morning and into the afternoon. Alina's calm presence and skillful hands guided Catherine through the increasingly intense contractions. Outside, Catherine could occasionally hear Kyle pacing on the porch or speaking quietly to the horses. As the sun began its descent, Catherine's labor reached its peak. The pain became all-encompassing, a force of nature that threatened to tear her apart. Alina murmured encouragement in a mixture of Spanish and English, her steady hand supporting Catherine as she pushed with all her strength. And then, miraculously, a cry pierced the air, thin and indignant, the most beautiful sound Catherine had ever heard. "Niño," Alina announced triumphantly, placing the squalling, red-faced infant on Catherine's chest. "Un niño fuerte, a strong boy." Tears streamed down Catherine's face as she gazed at her son. He had a shock of dark hair like Walter's and a determined little chin that Alina declared came from his mother. "Benjamin," Catherine whispered, the name she and Walter had chosen if the baby was a boy. "Benjamin Walter Zimmerman." After Alina had cleaned and swaddled the baby and helped Catherine into a fresh nightgown, she opened the door to beckon Kyle inside. He entered hesitantly, his hat clutched in his hands, his eyes immediately drawn to the tiny bundle in Catherine's arms. "You have a son," Catherine told him softly. Kyle approached the bed slowly, his expression one of wonder as he gazed down at the infant. "He's perfect," he breathed. "Looks just like you." "I named him Benjamin," Catherine said, "after Walter's father." "It's a good name," Kyle replied. "A strong name." Alina busied herself preparing a simple meal, giving them a moment of privacy. Kyle continued to stare at the baby, then finally at Catherine. "You did it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You kept your baby." "We kept him," Catherine corrected gently. "I couldn't have done this without you, Kyle." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of the bond that had formed, stronger than mere friendship, but still undefined, still cautious. The next few weeks passed in a blur of exhaustion and joy for Catherine. Baby Benjamin proved to be a healthy, vocal child with a hearty appetite and a distinct dislike for being put down. Kyle and Alina took turns helping, with Alina staying in the cabin for the first week and Kyle bringing supplies and handling the outdoor chores. Word of Benjamin's birth spread quickly through Miles City. To Catherine's surprise, several women from town not associated with Mrs. Fulton's Ladies' Aid Society came to call, bringing small gifts and practical advice. It seemed not everyone shared Mrs. Fulton's judgmental attitude. By early August, Catherine had settled into a routine with Benjamin. Kyle still visited regularly, but Catherine noticed a new restraint in his manner, as if he was deliberately maintaining a certain distance. She wondered if he regretted his involvement, or if he was simply respecting her status as a new mother. One evening, as Kyle prepared to leave after fixing a leak in the roof, Catherine found the courage to ask the question that had been troubling her. "Are you having second thoughts?" "About helping us?" Kyle looked startled. "Not at all. Why would you think that? You seem different lately, more reserved." Kyle sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I just don't want to overstep, Catherine. You've got Benjamin now and your focus should be on him." "The last thing you need is—" He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. "Is what?" Catherine pressed. "Is me complicating things," Kyle finished quietly. "I meant what I said about helping you raise him, but I don't want my feelings to become a burden to you. Your feelings." Kyle's gaze met hers directly. "I care for you, Catherine. More than I should, perhaps, and I care for Benjamin as if he were my own. But I know you're still grieving Walter, and I would never presume to—" "Kyle," Catherine interrupted gently, "having you in our lives has never been a complication. It's been a blessing." She took a deep breath. "I will always honor Walter's memory, and Benjamin will know his father through my stories, but I'm not blind to what's happening between us." Kyle stepped closer, hope dawning in his eyes. "And what is happening between us?" "Something unexpected," Catherine admitted. "Something that frightens me a little because I never thought I'd feel this way again, but something good, I think. Something worth exploring when we're both ready." Kyle reached out, tentatively taking her hand in his. "I can wait," he said simply. "However long you need." As summer gave way to autumn, life fell into a comfortable pattern for Catherine, Benjamin, and Kyle. Kyle had negotiated with his foreman to work 3 days on, 2 days off, spending his free time at Catherine's cabin. Together, they prepared for the coming winter, preserving vegetables from the garden, mending the cabin's chinking, laying by supplies that would see them through the snows. Benjamin thrived under their care, growing plumper and more alert by the day. He had Walter's dark hair but Catherine's blue eyes, and a smile that could light up the darkest day. Kyle was endlessly patient with him, cradling him with gentle hands that had broken wild horses and built sturdy fences. "He likes your voice," Catherine observed one evening as Kyle read aloud from a book while Benjamin listened with apparent fascination. "He always settles when you read to him." "Smart boy," Kyle replied with a grin. "Knows good literature when he hears it, thanks to his mama's teaching." The autumn brought another visitor, Mrs. Fulton, making what she termed her final appeal regarding Benjamin's future. Her face registered shock when she found Kyle at the cabin, comfortably settled in a chair with Benjamin asleep on his chest. "Mrs. Zimmerman," she began stiffly after Kyle had tactfully excused himself, taking Benjamin outside for some fresh air. "I see the rumors about your arrangement with Mr. Garrison are true." "If by arrangement you mean friendship and assistance, then yes," Catherine replied calmly. "Kyle has been invaluable in helping me care for Benjamin and maintain the cabin." "And what does he receive in return for this?" "Invaluable help?" Mrs. Fulton asked with an arched eyebrow. Catherine felt her temper rise but kept her voice level. "The satisfaction of keeping a promise and doing what's right. Kyle is an honorable man, Mrs. Fulton, though you seem determined to think the worst." "The Hardings are still willing to take the child," Mrs. Fulton persisted, "to give him a proper home away from whatever this situation is." Catherine stood, signaling the end of the conversation. "Benjamin has a proper home. He has a mother who loves him and a friend who has promised to help raise him. I appreciate your concern, Mrs. Fulton, but my decision is final." After Mrs. Fulton left, Kyle returned with a now awake Benjamin. "Everything all right?" he asked cautiously. "Everything is perfect," Catherine replied, taking her son into her arms. "Mrs. Fulton won't be bothering us again about Benjamin's future." The first snowfall came in late October, transforming the prairie into a glittering white expanse. Kyle had insisted on staying at the cabin during the worst of the weather, sleeping on a pallet by the fire while Catherine and Benjamin occupied the small bedroom. The arrangement raised eyebrows in town, but Catherine found she cared less and less about what others thought. On a clear November morning, Kyle took Catherine and Benjamin into Miles City in his wagon. Benjamin, now nearly 4 months old, was bundled in blankets against the cold, his chubby face peeking out curiously. The purpose of the trip was practical supplies were needed, and Kyle had business at the bank, but it was also Catherine's first real venture into town since Benjamin's birth. The reactions they received varied widely. Some people stared and whispered, clearly disapproving of the unmarried man accompanying the widow and her child. Others greeted them warmly, cooing over Benjamin and praising his healthy appearance. The general store owner, Mr. Peterson, made a point of telling Catherine how pleased he was to see her managing so well. "Your husband would be proud," he said kindly. "He talked of nothing but you and the coming baby in those final weeks." As they loaded their purchases into the wagon, Catherine noticed Kyle speaking intently with a man she didn't recognize. The conversation appeared serious, with Kyle gesturing emphatically before finally shaking the man's hand. "Everything all right?" she asked when Kyle returned. "Better than all right," Kyle replied with a smile. That was James Connor, the new railroad agent. He's looking for someone to teach his 3 children there living in town while he establishes the new freight office, but his wife is concerned about their education. I might have mentioned you have experience teaching. Catherine's eyes widened. You found me a teaching position. Just an introduction, Kyle clarified, but he seemed mighty interested when I told him about our reading lessons. Said his oldest boy is struggling with letters, and the younger 2 are at the age to start learning. He'll call on you next week if you're agreeable. Catherine felt a surge of hope. A teaching position, even a small one, would provide income and purpose beyond the cabin walls. Thank you, she said, impulsively squeezing Kyle's hand, for believing in me. Kyle's fingers interlaced with hers. Always, he promised. That evening, after Benjamin was asleep in his cradle, and the cabin was quiet save for the crackle of the fire, Catherine found herself studying Kyle's profile as he read by lamplight. The past months had changed him, or perhaps had simply revealed the man he truly was beneath the cowboy exterior. He read with confidence now, his finger no longer tracing each line, his pronunciation sure and clear. "Penny for your thoughts," Kyle said without looking up, a smile playing at his lips. "I was thinking how lucky Benjamin and I are," Catherine replied honestly. "To have found you when we needed you most." Kyle set down his book and turned to face her. "I'm the lucky one, Catherine. Before I met you, my life was just work and sleep, one day blending into the next. Now every day has meaning." He reached out, tentatively touching her cheek with calloused fingers. "I know it's too soon, and I promised I'd wait, but I need you to know that I love you. I love you and Benjamin both, and nothing would make me happier than to be a true family." Catherine's heart raced at his words. Was it too soon? Walter had been gone only 8 months, but those months had held a lifetime of experiences, grief and joy, fear and hope, endings and new beginnings. "Kyle," she began slowly, "I can't pretend that part of me doesn't still love Walter. He was my husband, Benjamin's father. That will never change." "I would never ask it to," Kyle said quietly. "But," Catherine continued, placing her hand over his, "my heart has room for more than one love. What I feel for you is different but no less real. You came into our lives when we needed you most, and you stayed even when it wasn't easy." She took a deep breath. "I love you too, Kyle, and so does Benjamin in his own way." Kyle's smile lit his entire face. "Does that mean?" "It means I'm ready," Catherine said, "for whatever comes next. For us to be a family, if that's truly what you want." "It's all I want," Kyle assured her, drawing her gently into his arms. Their first kiss was tender, a promise of all that might follow. The winter passed in a cocoon of contentment. Catherine began teaching the Connor children 3 mornings a week, finding unexpected joy in guiding young minds. Benjamin grew and thrived, rolling over and then sitting up, his personality emerging as bright and determined. And Kyle, true to his word, was there through it all, reading stories by the fire, rocking Benjamin to sleep, bringing laughter into a home that had known too much sorrow. In February, a blizzard struck Montana territory with particular fury, isolating Catherine's cabin for nearly a week. Kyle had arrived just before the storm hit, and Catherine thanked God for his presence as the wind howled and snow piled against the windows. Without his foresight in storing extra firewood and provisions, they might have faced real danger. On the 3rd night of the storm, as they sat before the fire with Benjamin sleeping peacefully in his cradle, Kyle took Catherine's hand. "This storm has me thinking," he said, his voice serious, "about how fragile life is out here and how important it is to grab happiness while we can." Catherine nodded, understanding all too well the precariousness of frontier life. "What are you saying, Kyle?" I'm saying I don't want to wait anymore. Kyle met her gaze steadily. Catherine Zimmerman, will you marry me? Let me be a father to Benjamin and, God willing, to other children we might have together. Catherine's heart swelled with emotion. Yes, she whispered, tears of joy welling in her eyes. Yes, I'll marry you. Kyle pulled her close, his kiss sealing their promise. Outside, the blizzard raged on, but within the cabin's walls, a new family had formed, not from blood, but from choice, from courage, and from love that had grown in the most unlikely circumstances. Spring arrived with its promise of renewal, melting the snow and coaxing green shoots from the earth. Kyle had moved permanently to Catherine's cabin, making the short ride to Double Creek Ranch for his work shifts. They had set their wedding date for early May, planning a simple ceremony with Reverend Thompson from Miles City. As the wedding approached, Catherine found herself thinking often of Walter. Not with the sharp pain of fresh grief, but with a gentle melancholy that acknowledged what had been lost while embracing what had been found. One evening, she confessed these thoughts to Kyle as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. Sometimes I feel guilty, she admitted, for finding happiness again so soon. Kyle was quiet for a moment. Do you think Walter would want you to be alone, to deny yourself and Benjamin a family? Catherine shook her head. No, he wanted us to be happy and secure above all else. Then honor him by being happy, Kyle said simply. By raising Benjamin to know both the father of his birth and the father who chooses him every day. Catherine leaned against Kyle's shoulder, drawing strength from his solid presence. You're a wise man, Kyle Garrison. Not wise, Kyle demurred with a smile. Just lucky enough to know what matters. Their wedding day dawned clear and mild, the prairie adorned with wildflowers as if nature itself approved their union. The ceremony was small but joyful, attended by the Connors, Alina and her husband Miguel, several of Kyle's fellow ranch hands, and even Mr. Peterson from the general store. Catherine wore a simple blue dress with white lace trim, and Benjamin, now nearly 9 months old, was resplendent in a tiny suit Kyle had ordered specially from Denver. Mrs. Fulton and her Ladies' Aid Society were conspicuously absent, but Catherine found she didn't mind. Those who mattered were present, those who had supported her choice to keep her son and build a new life. As they spoke their vows beneath the old cottonwood tree near the cabin, Catherine held Benjamin in one arm and joined her free hand with Kyle's. The symbolism wasn't lost on those watching. This was not just the union of two people, but the creation of a family. I now pronounce you husband and wife, Reverend Thompson declared. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. Kyle kissed her tenderly, then pressed a kiss to Benjamin's forehead. The baby gurgled happily, reaching for Kyle's face with chubby hands. He approves, Catherine laughed through happy tears. Smart boy, Kyle replied, echoing his familiar refrain. Just like his mama. The celebration continued through the afternoon, with food and music and laughter filling the homestead that had once seemed so lonely to Catherine. As the sun began to set, Alina took charge of Benjamin, shooing the newlyweds toward the cabin with a knowing smile. You go, she insisted. Benjamin stays with us tonight. Wedding gift. Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their cabin, Catherine marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the depths of grief and fear to the heights of joy and hope, it seemed almost miraculous. What are you thinking? Kyle asked, his fingers tracing gentle patterns on her bare shoulder. That life is so unexpected, Catherine replied. A year ago I couldn't imagine surviving, let alone finding happiness again, and now here we are. Kyle drew her closer. Here we are, he agreed. And here we'll stay, building something good together. I like the sound of that, Catherine murmured, nestling into his embrace. building something good. The years that followed proved the truth of Kyle's words. Their family grew with the birth of a daughter, Sarah Elena. 2 years after their wedding, followed by twin boys, James and Thomas, 3 years later. Benjamin thrived as the eldest, protective and proud of his siblings. Bearing a striking resemblance to the father, he knew only through Catherine's stories and the few photographs she had preserved. Kyle proved to be a devoted father to all the children, never distinguishing between Benjamin and his biological offspring. He taught them to ride, to respect the land, and to read with the same love of words Catherine had instilled in him. As the children grew, so did the homestead. Kyle eventually left his position at Double Creek Ranch to work their land full-time, expanding from the original cabin to a proper farmhouse with rooms for their growing family. Catherine continued teaching, first the Connor children and then others, eventually establishing a small school in their front room that served neighboring families too far from town. Her reputation as an educator grew throughout the region, and she found profound satisfaction in watching young minds blossom under her guidance. Mrs. Fulton eventually left Miles City when her husband was transferred to Helena, but not before witnessing the success of what she had once deemed an impossible situation. Catherine never gloated over this silent victory, understanding that the older woman had simply been unable to imagine possibilities beyond conventional wisdom. On Benjamin's 10th birthday, Kyle presented him with a hand-tooled leather journal, similar to one Catherine had given Kyle years before. "Your mother has been telling you stories about Walter Zimmerman since you were born," Kyle explained as the boy examined the gift. "Now it's time for you to collect those stories yourself, to write them down and keep them safe." Benjamin looked up at Kyle, his expression serious. "But you're my pa," he said with the directness of childhood. "The only one I've ever known." Kyle placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "I'm your pa by choice and by love," he agreed. "And Walter Zimmerman is your pa by birth. You're lucky enough to have two fathers who wanted the very best for you, one who watches from heaven, and one who gets to be here teaching you to ride and cipher." Catherine, watching from the doorway with baby Thomas on her hip, and Sarah clinging to her skirts, felt her heart swell with love for this man who had kept his promise beyond all expectation. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Catherine found Kyle on the porch, gazing at the stars that spangled the vast Montana sky. "You're a good man, Kyle Garrison," she said, slipping her arm through his. "The best man I know." Kyle smiled down at her, the years having added a few lines to his face but none to his heart. "Just keeping my promise," he said simply. "To help you raise that baby," Catherine laughed softly. "I'd say you've done that and more, no regrets." Kyle asked, a hint of his old uncertainty surfacing briefly. "Not one," Catherine assured him, standing on tiptoe to kiss him. "You were right, all those years ago. A baby needs a mother's love, but having a father who chooses them every day, that's a special kind of blessing." Kyle drew her close against the evening chill, his arm strong around her waist. "We chose each other," he corrected gently. "All of us. And that's the best family there is." As they stood together under the vast Montana sky, Catherine reflected on the long journey from that desperate day when Mrs. Fulton had first suggested she give up her unborn child. How close she had come to losing everything that now made her life rich and full. And how one man's simple offer, "Keep your baby, I'll raise it with you," had changed not just her destiny, but the destinies of all their children. Some might call it chance or luck or coincidence, but Catherine knew it for what it was, a miracle, plain and simple. The miracle of finding love where it was least expected, of building family from the broken pieces of dreams, of choosing hope when despair seemed the only option. And as the stars wheeled overhead and the prairie wind whispered around their home, Catherine Garrison knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice for Benjamin, for herself, and for the man who stood beside her, constant as the North Star, guiding them all home.